Welcome, everyone. This to our Conquering Cover Crops Coast to Coast highlights from our 2021 to 2025 on-farm demonstration trial featuring farms in California, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. We have a lot to cover today, so we're kicking off right at the hour. But as we're all getting settled in, please familiarize yourself with the questions chat. You will be muted, as you can tell, and unable to mute. Sorry about that. As we are recording this webinar for posterity's sake, and we'll be posting this webinar on our website. However, at the end of this webinar, we will have a Q&A session where you will have the opportunity to speak directly with us. And so keep your questions for Q&A session. Alternatively, feel free to use the chat. Put your question in there for the Q&A session. And if you do add a question, please mention the slide and or the speaker that you are directing the question toward. That can be helpful. So today we're going to give a brief overview about the project and give a data collection overview. Then each of our state leads is going to go over their trial design and results by state. And then I'll give the social survey results, and Bianca will wrap up with lessons learned in Q&A. So now I'm going to kick it to Dr. Michelle Perez to tell us about the project. Take it away, Michelle.
All right, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and it has been a long journey, and we're thrilled to be able to share this project with you. Just let me briefly introduce the team members, and I won't read out the names of everyone on this slide, and you'll be hearing from many of them during the webinar. I just want to point out two things here that make this project special. First, there's this interdisciplinary nature of this on-farm trial. NRCS called for that, and we rose to the occasion, forming a SIG leads team of soil scientists, economists, and social scientists to analyze the three legs of the sustainability stool: soils, economic, and social data in relation to practice adoption. And second, we couldn't do any of that without the partnership of AFT staff in 5 states, their contracting partners, and the 15 partners who agreed to join us on this journey, and you'll learn about later. There was a lot of supporting staff as well, and we want to thank them and recognize the role of Jen Moore, who is our former PI with me, who wrote the project, and Rachel Siemens-Varner, who helped lead the soils team for some time. Bianca Mobius-Clune is my current PI sharing in this role. So conquering cover crops challenges from coast to coast. It's not just catchy. We coined this name because we wanted to make sure we satisfied NRCS's SIG requests, which were to support farmers to full transition of soil health management systems by adopting cover crops and other soil health practices, and by addressing regional issues that are involved and specific cover crop management challenges. We also wanted to defer to what each farmer was specifically interested in testing. And so we found 15 brave souls representing 3 geographic regions and growing these 6 different cropping systems to join us. Thank you. In addition to this webinar and the slides today, you will also have access to 4 other webinars on our upcoming Farmland Information Center site. We'll also be publishing 7 individual on-farm trial case studies. We have an overall project report to share and a journal article that we will focus on the roller crimping results in New York and Kentucky. For farmers only, they received annual reports summarizing the details and providing them with the highlights of the design, the soils, the economics, and the social outcomes analyses. 8 of the remaining 15 farmers are going to receive individual final farmer reports with all of their 3 data sets and summaries. And of course, we're going to report to NRCS with lots of semi-annual reports and a detailed soils, social, and economic survey summary report, including lessons learned and recommendations. And before I turn it over to the rest of the team, I just want to say overall, the experience was awesome and also hard. This was the first project of its kind at AFT, and we were excited to be a part of it. Overall, I think it's safe to say that everyone reported they were happy that they participated, though it was a slog at some points. As you can imagine, over 5 years, we met and addressed many challenges, such as COVID, such as weather. The farmers themselves had challenges such as landowner changes. They lost buyers of their crops, and a few had crop failures. The AFT staff themselves had a lot of turnover. We had 4 different bus drivers leading the SIG leads team. So that's a lot of transition. And before the application process, we had, very little time to recruit new adopters of cover crops, and therefore we worked with already adopters. And what did already adopters want to do? They wanted to fine tune their termination options. They wanted to explore multi-species versus single species. And some were, just wanting simple versus sophisticated replicated trial designs. And so along with that, we had to build a data collection system from scratch. We had minimal guidance from NRCS, and so we had a lot of preparation to do. So all of this is a way to summarize the challenges we had, but the fun we had going through this process together. Next slide. Thank you.
So I'm Aisha Tapp Ross. I'm the current bus driver of the project. And so I'm going to explain the data that was collected and how it was collected. Following this explanation, each of the regional leads will go over the regional soil health and economic results, amongst other things. And Ellen Yateman will give an in-depth assessment of the social results near the end of the webinar. Next slide. So the trials were split into 2 trial designs. 9 of our farms used the non-replicated trial design seen on your left, which consisted of either one field split into 2 or 3 sections, depending on the number of treatments, or 2 neighboring fields with similar soil textures. 6 of our trials were randomized replicated plot designs seen on your right, which are better used for statistical analyses. Next slide. For the data collection, we used the USDA NRCS collection and processing instructions for soil health tests. For the non-replicated fields, we randomly chose 3 main locations within each field or field section. For the replicated plots, we chose 1 main location per plot. And using a trench spade, a 6-inch long by 2-inch thick and 2-inch wide section of soil was collected for each main location, and also for 4 subsamples near those main locations, as seen in the images in the middle one on the right, giving us 5 subsamples per main location. These 5 subsamples were then homogenized and sent to the lab for analysis. All trials underwent 2 measures of soil health, the NRCS In-Field Soil Health Assessment, or IFSHA, and the Cornell Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health, or the CASH report. For the regions outside of the New England area, we also sent samples to local labs for chemical analysis in order to assess regional nutrient recommendations and compare the accuracy of the Cornell assessment, just in case their data skewed more to the New England region, which is where they received most of their samples from. The in-field soil health assessment gave us a general qualitative analysis for each treatment. For this, we chose 1 main location per treatment and followed the NRCS Cropland IFSHA guide. The IFSHA evaluated whether 11 different indicators met threshold criteria, and then the results from the 11 indicators were then used to assess whether the soil had any of the 4 NRCS-defined regional resource concerns: compaction, soil organism habitat loss, organic matter depletion, and aggregate instability. For the quantitative analysis, we used the Cornell CASH report seen here. The CASH report quantitatively analyzes 12 physical, biological, and chemical soil properties seen on the left. The values are then translated to ratings or scores, and ranked from low to very high in relation to other farms of similar soil textures. And those textures can be seen here. Finally, each sample is given an overall score, which is an average of the 12 indicator scores, and that gives a snapshot of general soil health of that field location. For the economic data, that was collected on a yearly basis after the end of the calendar year, and it combined national estimates with actual on-farm costs, which was entered into one worksheet. The national data sets included machinery input cost estimates and crop and input prices. The farmers provided their actual cover crop costs, input prices and rates, crop yields, the dates in which each practice occurred, and the machinery that was used for each practice. This is an example of the field operations worksheets that we used. In this worksheet, we collected crops grown, yield, and acreage per treatment, the operations data and what was done, the machinery type that was used and the specifics of that machinery, the material type, if there was an input, including the cost and rate of application. And finally, we collected any other operations that were not applied on a per acre basis. So for example, a tillage event would have the date of the event, the type of the event, so in this case tillage, what kind of machinery that was used, the specifics of that machinery, the horsepower, the width, all of which helped us better estimate the machinery costs from the national data sets. We also noted whether it was owned or rented, which had an effect on the overall estimation cost as well. So using this information from the worksheet, we developed a financial analysis for each farm by crop year. To do this, we calculated the net income of the yield times the published price minus the machinery and operation cost, and ran this equation for both the control and treatments. Then we used a partial budget to compare the net income and treatment costs between the treatments and control, which is seen on your right. We also collected social data through a variety of methods. 4 methods were used to collect the social data. First, social indicator surveys from participating farmers in year 1, year 3, and year 5. This survey included questions centered around participants' experience with cover crop treatments and the project itself, their motivations to participate and continue to participate, challenges that they faced, their change in knowledge or attitudes towards cover crops, and their capacity to continue implementing their cover crop treatments, amongst other things. Also, to supplement these results of the surveys, we conducted a farmer focus group in year 5 to collect qualitative data to support our survey findings. We conducted internal focus groups with the project AFT staff in year 1, year 3, and year 5 to gather lessons learned from the administrative side of things, as well as to help us modify our approach if needed. And then finally, at every field day, we asked attendees to complete an exit survey to share what they learned at the field day. Demo trial participants hosted field days in 2022, 23, and 24 for this project. All the social data collected through these methods will be aggregated into a final lessons learned report that will be shared on our website shortly. And now our fantastic regional teams will share insights about how trials were designed, results, and some key lessons learned, starting with Kara Roselle from New England. So go ahead, Kara.
Thanks, Aisha. Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Roselle, New England Soil Health Program Manager. So in New England, we collaborated with researchers from UMass and with Massachusetts NRCS resource conservationist Kate Parsons. We worked with 3 dairy farmers on fields where they grow continuous silage corn. They have simple demonstration designs with just 1 split field and no replication. And initially, all 3 farms started with 2 treatments and 1 control because they were interested in exploring more than one approach. The farmers in New England explored shorter season corn, rye and tillage radish cover crop mix, no-till planting methods compared to conventional tillage, and roller crimping, which involves a specialized piece of equipment that bends the stem of the cover crop. And if the cover crop is mature enough, it can't bounce back up and it dies, leaving a mulch on the ground. And finally, 2 of them wanted to try double cropping, which we also call green chop, which just means harvesting the cover crop for feed. In our region, the short growing season is a significant challenge for cover crop establishment. This challenge is compounded by erratic precipitation patterns. We're getting stormier falls in our region with more intense precipitation some years, and also some very dry falls in other years. So under these conditions, farmers struggle to get cover crops planted during the fall, leading to lost cover crop benefits over the fall and the winter, while also making it more challenging to achieve enough stand density for weed suppression and enough maturity for an effective and timely roller crimp. I'll talk more about this in a minute, but first I'm going to give you the high level on our soils and economic results. So to understand change over time, we need to start at the beginning. The baseline overall scores for our 3 farms range from medium, which is color-coded yellow, and that indicates that yields and sustainability of farming may currently be constrained, to very high in dark green, indicating that past management has been effective at maintaining soil health. We expect farms with lower starting scores to show greater improvement over the course of the project than farms with higher starting scores. To analyze the change over time, we subtracted the year 5 scores or values from the year 1 scores or values. And what we found was that the overall score trends were inconsistent, ranging from a small decrease to a large increase in overall score. However, we did find that the farms with the lower starting scores did have the highest increase in overall scores over time. When looking at the change in soil health indicators over time, we found that for most farms and treatments, the values for surface hardness decreased, indicating less compaction, while we saw increases in soil organic matter, aggregate stability, and ACE soil protein index, which is a measure of microbial activity. So in this table, the measured benefits are noted by the green boxes. We also found that despite the removal of biomass from the green chop treatment, soil health outcomes were not noticeably diminished compared to the other 2 treatments. However, a replicated trial design would be needed to be confident in this result, and overall, more time is needed to see substantial differences in soil health outcomes from cover cropping. In terms of economic results for the New England region, using green chop as a second crop showed great potential. And every year, green chop held the highest net income on average 67% higher than the other treatments, despite the small additional cost for harvest. And we did not see substantial yield losses for the main cash crop associated with green chop harvest for these farmers. Terminating by roller crimp also shows economic potential, but it's very difficult to implement, which I'll talk about in a moment. After the initial year of learning, roller crimping net incomes were consistent with pre-plant herbicide termination. When roller crimping was successfully implemented, there was no difference in cash crop yields compared to pre-plant herbicide termination. All right, so why is it so hard to roller crimp? As I mentioned, we have a short growing season, so the timing is critical. But when the weather doesn't cooperate, operations timelines can easily be thrown off. Our farmers made a total of 7 attempts at roller crimping between them, and only 1 of those attempts was successful. So Freund's family farm attempted 1 crimp, but the cover crop was too immature and had to be herbicide terminated. That farmer sold the farm to Canaan View Farm, and they were just uninterested in crimping, so we dropped that treatment. Jim Smith of Cushman Farm had 2 challenging years getting cover crops established due to weather-related operations delays. So he then had 1 ideal year in which he had an excellent crimp and required no herbicide for cover crop termination. And now this farmer plants green, meaning he plants corn before terminating the cover crop. But in his final year, we had this early hot spell, and the corn just came up much faster than expected. So when he showed up to crimp his field, the corn was already up and he had to skip it. He had to abandon it and use herbicide instead. Barway Farm tried twice to crimp, but both times the cover crop came up too thin to provide effective weed suppression, requiring the same amount of herbicide as his no-till parcel, where the cover crop was left standing. So Barway Farm switched to trying zone till in the former roller crimp plot, and I'll talk about that in a second. First, I want to talk about double cropping. So 2 of our farms trialed double cropping. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that's harvesting, again, that's harvesting cover crop for feed. And both had an increased net profit, as we just discussed. We did expect this. In 2024, the farmers increased their net profits by $131 and $613 per acre compared to their conventionally tilled plot. And while we had expected to see decreased soil health outcomes on the harvested plots due to the removal of this biomass, there was actually no clear difference in soil health outcomes. So we attribute this to the fact that the farmers in our trial were returning nutrients and organic matter to the soil through twice annual manure applications, and perhaps more significantly, the root biomass from the cover crop remains in the soil, providing substantial soil health benefits. So our third farmer didn't trial cover crop or double cropping. Rather, he compared conventional tillage to a simple burn down of standing rye compared initially to roller crimping. But in the third year, the farmer stopped crimping and instead adopted zone tillage, and the initial results have been really promising. The soil health tests compared to no-till are comparable or better across indicators, and they observed, the farmers, that the surface residue is comparable in the zone-tilled plot to the no-till plot, but that planting actually went more smoothly in the zone-tilled than the no-till plot because the zone tillage resulted in fewer skips. So they also observed that compaction was reduced in their zone-tilled parcel compared to the no-till parcel, and our bulk density test bore that out. The compaction mitigation is, of course, due to the ripping action during planting, but interestingly, the soil in the zone-tilled plot did remain firm enough to support heavy harvest equipment during our wettest year, when their silage truck couldn't be driven onto the conventionally tilled plot, which drove up the cost of harvest for that control plot. So for that farm, zone tillage is proving to be a very practical compromise between no-till and conventional tillage, and they're really happy with the results, and they plan to expand this practice across more acreage going forward. So that's all I have for you. I'll hand it off to Paul now.
Thanks, Carol. Hello from California. I'm Paul Lum, American Farmland Trust Senior Agricultural Specialist, and our team includes Tom Stein, Anel Trujillo, Hedel Gallardo, and Vanessa Perez. California trial design. In California, our team managed 3 demonstration trials, all in major crops grown throughout the state. Farm CA1's trial is on a diversified farming operation, usually planted to summer crops. And during this trial, processing tomatoes were rotated with sunflowers and cucumbers over the 3-year period. Note this trial had 1 year less than the others due to cover crop failure in year 1. So we had to transfer that year 1, actual year 1 into year 2 and change fields. So, once we were able to do that, change fields and kind of get back on board with the farmers' rotation, and just as was mentioned earlier today, some of the challenges we face with farmers and the weather. So during this trial, the cover crops consisted of bell beans, winter peas, and vetch, planted after fall harvest with a no-till drill. And termination occurs in the spring prior to planting the cash crop with either a mower or a large disc, depending on the subsequent spring crop. In 2024, we held a very successful field day in partnership with university farmers there. CA2 is an almond orchard. The cover crops consist of triticale, beans, and winter peas, again planted after fall harvest with a conventional grain drill and terminated by mowing in late spring. The almond orchard is no-till, and the farmer plants the cover crop every other alleyway, and then in the subsequent year alternates, plants the other alleyway, and continues in that manner. And almond growers and wine grape growers very commonly plant cover crops or maintain resident vegetation every other row to allow for manual labor to work in the row that is not planted, to allow for prunings to gather in the unplanted row. So very typical in California, very puzzling to many. And in this trial in the almond orchard, we held a very successful field day, and it was featured on local TV news. California Farm 3 and wine grapes. Again, all of these control plots were no cover crop. And I want to step back and mention that the no cover crop scheme or management is the prior management for these farmers. So they have very little experience in cover crops, and if they do, it may be in other crops that they grow, but not in the crops that we trialed. So going back to CA3, wine grape vineyard, cover crops consisted of a clover mix, about 5 species of clovers, and the grower had fairly strong ideas, reasons why not to plant triticale, a grain or a grass, and not to plant some foraging type covers. So the clover mix was recommended to him, and he's very satisfied with that. Planted in the fall again with a no-till drill, termination through primarily through mowing in the spring. And all of these farmers rely on fall rains to germinate the cover crop seeds. Fortunately, we work with farmers that can irrigate if absolutely necessary, if we don't have adequate rains in the fall. Many farms do not have irrigation access in the fall if they're sourcing water from district or surface supplies. California regional challenges. Although California grows more than 400 crops, regional challenges and resource concerns are considerable. We are experiencing a long-term drought in much of the state, resulting in depleted groundwater supplies. Additional resource concerns are poor groundwater quality, low soil organic matter content, compaction, and poor air quality. Furthermore, fall and spring rainfall has been variable and unpredictable, more so in the last 20 years. In this project, we tried to tailor the trials to address these concerns. There's a very low adoption of cover crops. And as I mentioned, the three crops we're working with that span hundreds of thousands of acres collectively. Many farmers believe that cover crops compete for soil moisture, soil nutrients, and increased frost risk. Vegetable growers are concerned with crop residue, and it's something we experienced and found in talking to our vegetable farmer and others that we work with. They're dealing with an opportunity cost challenge where they feel they could be planting a cash crop instead of a cover crop. And so that's a lessons learned for us that, to be on the ground and really understand some of these types of challenges. And additionally, with almonds and walnuts, which we didn't work in walnuts, but both nut crops, hampered by poorly managed cover crops. So all pointing to very low adoption across hundreds of thousands of acres in California's Central Valley. However, studies by researchers, farm advisors, and others are finding significant overall cover crop benefits and are demonstrating approaches to mitigate risk. This project allows the American Farmland Trust to further study and demonstrate the benefits of cover crop adoption on working farms. California soil results. Overall soil health scores increased across the board. Baseline soil health scores were medium to high, but we found change over time. And on the graph to the right, you can see per treatment, per farm, and in 2 of the 3, the treatment gains were greater than gains in the control. The year 5, subtracting from year 1, so the transition across the 4 years, we found a change in overall score. Overall scores increased across the board. And for farm CA1, we can go to the table in the bottom. Farm CA1, major indicators had minimal changes, but we only have 4 years of data. As I mentioned, Farm 4.1 was in duration the shortest trial. And one notable gain in the treatment was in aggregate stability, as shown in the lower table under aggregate stability. You may not be able to see that, but we're pleased to see something noteworthy, significant. Farm CA2 and CA3 found increases from year 1 through year 5 in soil organic matter content, aggregate stability, ACE protein index, soil respiration, and active carbon. The takeaway here is we need more time to see substantial differences. California economic results. In vegetable systems, as a result of cover crops, yields did not decrease, and cover crop planning and maintenance costs, maintenance primarily noting mowing, did not heavily impact net income. Tomatoes had a 10% higher yield in treatment, but since we only had 2 years of yield data, we can't confidently say that yield gains are correlated with cover crops. Pleased to say the farmer is very pleased with his trial and expanding adoption of cover crops across his farm on other fields and in different crops. So our vegetable farmer has been, a joy to work with, appreciative, and an example for a lot of neighboring farms. In almonds, the first year was the farmer's trial and error learning curve with cover crop mowing height. How high do you mow? How low do you mow? When do you mow? Do you have to mow again? You can imagine cover crops in almonds or wine grapes could exceed 3 feet tall, can be very thick. What is your seeding rate? What is your seed mix? And it took a year to get through this trial and error period. And but in year 2 and 3, the grower found that additional mowing passes were not required for cover crop termination. And keep in mind that in the control, the farmer maintains resident vegetation, not strictly bare soil. And so we were pleased to find that costs did not increase due to cover cropping. And in fact, we found higher yields, 11%, resulting in 11% increase in net income. In the wine grapes, we found that additional operations, such as extra mowings, were not needed for cover crop termination. And we were really pleased to work with the grower who had some specific interests in the way we managed the cover crop, the every other row strategy, tillage and mowing strategies that we learned from the grower a little bit about wine grape management. And we can take that forward as we do more trials in the future, as we're able to promote cover cropping in wine grapes. Net income differences were driven by yield impacts. So we, at this time, can't correlate the cover cropping to net income differences, but we have a much better understanding of that dynamic. The California trial takeaways, the overarching takeaway, especially evident from our 2 field days, where we had great dialogue with the farmers and with the attendees. Farmers observed greater soil biodiversity, organic matter content, and water holding capacity. Farmer Tanya Gemperly, almond farmer, quote, "After 3 years of organic matter gains, the soil is loaded with earthworms." And you can see pictured is Tanya demonstrating cover crop, and we had shovels and spades and buckets just for everyone to observe soil organic matter, biological life in the soil. Biggest benefit: on-farm water savings in a water resource impacted region through improved soil health and water holding capacity. And the biggest challenge: managing a trial through variable market conditions, weather, and crop production. So at this point, I'll pass the presentation on to Brian Brandt of the Kentucky team.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Brian Brandt. I direct the Ag Conservation Innovations Initiative at American Farmland Trust, and both Aisha and I work together to coordinate with the Kentucky farmers on the demonstration trials in Kentucky. We actually had 4 farmers in Kentucky, and you can see on the map there that one of our farmers was in southern Kentucky, about within an hour north of Nashville. We had one farmer in central Kentucky, just north of Lake Cumberland. A third farmer that was about 30 miles northeast of Louisville. And then we had a fourth farmer that was about a half an hour, 30 miles east of the Lexington area. And just I want to point out the picture there. That's a high biomass cover crop with one of our farmer participants. That was after we had had a frost, and some of the species had winter killed, but there were still some species that were growing and active. And I'm actually holding a turnip in my hand there. So we had a multi-species mix in that particular field. Next slide, please. So I'd like to just give a little bit of overview of some of the characteristics or variables that we were dealing with our farmer participants. So our first farm, Mount Folly Farm, is actually we were trialing cover crops in an organic system. So we had multi-crops in the rotation, and we were comparing in replicated trials in this example, multiple treatments compared to the control. So the control would have been a cover crop at a traditional seeding rate with tillage termination. Treatment A is also a cover crop with an increased seeding rate, so we get more biomass and hopefully more inhibition of any weeds growing, again with tillage termination. And then in treatment B, it was a cover crop at increased seeding rate with roller crimp termination. So essentially, we were trying to see if we could be successful with that farmer with a no-till cover crop operation in an organic system. Our next two farmers, I would consider kind of in the high management, high input category. So the first is Walnut Grove. In a 2-year rotation, corn, followed by wheat, double crop soybean. The control was no cover crop, and treatment A was a cover crop following the wheat, double crop soybeans ahead of the corn crop. And this was in a split field. There were no replicates in this example. The third farm, Pleasure View Farm, this was a multi-crop rotation, corn, soybean, wheat. The control, they had been utilizing some occasional cover crops, and our treatment was having a yearly cover crop in those fields or in that treatment field. And then our fourth farmer, Chris Pierce Farms, would be, I would consider a very good manager, but in a more of a low input philosophy for this particular farm. And again, kind of a multi-crop rotation, and again in a replicated setting here. So we were in the control comparing really a winter cover crop in one portion of his rotation to a high biomass summer cover crop in some of the replicated trials. So really getting that increased biomass, increased organic matter, and would we be seeing benefits from doing that in more of a low input system on his farm? And again, we just had Kentucky trial designs that are a mix of replicated and not non-replicated examples. Next slide, please. So really what we were trying to overcome is some of the regional challenges that you would typically see in Kentucky. So really the biggest challenge, or one of the main challenges, is termination timing. Farmers are very reticent in this example or in this situation because of varying rainfall patterns to let that cover crop grow later into the season to have that higher biomass. They have fear of planting into that higher biomass, or fear of having a low rainfall situation, and they let it grow too long, and you can deplete soil moisture, impact germination. Or you can have a high rainfall situation where it just delays termination, high biomass. You have to plant into a high biomass cover crop, and it also can delay planting potentially. So just a lot of risk averseness to that, termination aspect. Also, in Kentucky, we have quite a few acres where they are in a double crop system. So small grain followed by double crop soybeans. Many times soybeans aren't harvested until November, late November even. And so you have issues getting your cover crop planted in a timely manner. So you get growth in the fall and kind of spurring that growth into the spring as well. Worried about nitrogen needs for corn following a cover crop. So you definitely may need to adjust your nitrogen management plan when planting into a cover crop. And finally, just the aspect of having increased labor and management. You need to set aside time in the fall when maybe you want to be harvesting to get that cover crop in. And there's increased management definitely into managing that cover crop in the spring as well. So you need to kind of manage field by field and what may be happening across your farmed areas as to how you manage that cover crop in the spring. Next slide, please. Let's get into some Kentucky soil results. So baseline, the overall, the soil health scores were medium to high for all of our farmers that participated in our project. These are typically silt loam fields in good internal drainage. So generally, soil health is generally decent, but we're trying to improve that with the cover crop demos that we're doing. We also, if we look at the next graph, we can see that if we compare year 1 to year 5, we saw an overall increase in those soil health parameters, those soil health variables for all the fields and all the treatments. So generally, just over time, we saw an increase in soil health. And that included both the control areas and the treatment areas. If we go ahead here. So if we talk about the soil health indicators, we can also see there was a positive change in time for most of the soil health indicators in most of the both control and the treatment areas. So if we look at soil organic matter, we mostly saw increases in soil organic matter over time and largely saw increases in aggregate stability and the ACE soil protein. And I just want to point out a picture here. This is a shovel full of soil in one of our treatment fields. And you can see here that there's some fungi growing in this particular picture. And that's really a great indicator of increased fungal growth. These are positive things when you see these in the field. They help with making nutrients more available, kind of improving that aggregate stability of the soil, and overall has great soil health benefits in this field. So that was great to see that growing in one of the shovelfuls that we pulled up when we were pulling soil samples in this particular field. Next slide, please. Overview a little bit of the Kentucky economic results. So I just want to point out right at the beginning that implementation takes time to learn. And farmers learn how to tweak their system over time. And again, over time, we think that leads to better economic outcomes. However, in our trials in Kentucky, we consistently really saw a net decrease in income from the cover crop operations. And that was primarily due to just the increased cost in putting in a cover crop. Typically, the yield remained consistent across our fields, but the net income was consistently lower due to those increased cover crop costs on our demonstration trials. In the organic system, we did have real challenges with roller crimping and getting that cover crop killed with roller crimping. So we definitely saw decreased net income in that situation. That resulted in yield decreases and ultimately net income decreases for the organic farmer. And ultimately, we kind of changed up that trial over time just due to the poor results we were having with the being able to roller crimp that cover crop. Going into some overarching takeaways, I think the biggest takeaway and the most positive thing that all the participating farmers are really more willing to use cover crops on all their fields. Even though we may not have seen the economic outcomes we would have desired, all the farmers are committed to utilizing cover crops across more of their farms and more of their fields. I think one of the biggest factors there is as they're visually seeing soil health benefits, greater soil health outcomes. I think kind of what's unseen from a economic perspective is they're also seeing, reduced weed pressure. They're still having termination costs like maybe they normally would, but I think they are seeing reduced weed pressure by having the cover crop in those fields. So that's a positive thing for them. A couple of the biggest benefits. One of the biggest benefits for the farmers participating here was just the opportunity to be active participants in the trial and learning process and learning from other farmers. We had meetings every year with the farmers all together, and they really benefited, enjoyed learning from other farmers, what they were having success with, what their challenges were, how they were overcoming those challenges. So that was a big benefit for our farmers. There was also a huge interest in creating a statewide soil health network, and they really saw a specific need for, having recognized sampling protocols like we did in our project, overall comprehensive analysis of those samples using the techniques that we used, and really felt that the TA we provided for the farmers, we helped put together cover crop mixes, helped with their equipment, how they should set up their equipment in their operations when they're maybe planning into a cover crop, et cetera. So really think having a state soil health network where farmers are sharing across multiple scenarios would really be a big benefit in Kentucky. Some of the biggest challenges, seeding of cover crop after double crop soybeans. It just gets late in the year and it becomes a timing issue and not being able to get growth in the fall. Equipment, again, we really, one farmer struggled with utilizing a roller crimper to terminate the cover crops. Letting cover crops grow longer into the spring, there was some risk averseness there of letting those cover crops grow longer and having to plan into that higher biomass. And finally, trying to utilize no-till and organic system. Our farmer really struggled with that and did not have success with that. So that really covers our our Kentucky scenario. And I'm going to pass it over to our New York team. So Caitlin and Ben.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to transition us now into sharing out results from our trials conducted here in New York. My name is Caitlin Tucker. I'm the New York Agricultural Stewardship Program Manager, joining you all from a very snow-covered Buffalo. And our trials were conducted here in Western New York and led by Aaron Risto with support from myself and my colleague Ben Rosa. Next slide. Quickly before I dive in, I just want to highlight that our farm partners for these cover crop trials are part of a much more expansive demonstration farm network that our team oversees here and has overseen here since 2017. And through these partnerships, we continue to gain practical insights into other conservation practices like nutrient management and biochar application and reduced tillage. And these partnerships often span several years and different trials. So I want to highlight that I think, all of this work that we're talking about today, the on-farm research, especially here in New York, we found it to be very mutually beneficial for everyone involved. Next slide. Oh, thanks. All right, so the regional cover cropping issues that we wanted to address with our trials look very similar to the challenges that Carol raised in New England and some of the other regions highlighted. The first being, we also have a short window for establishing cover crops following corn. In particular, it can be a challenge for operations that are growing grain corn, because it's not uncommon for harvests to extend into mid to late November, sometimes very early December. And shortly thereafter, we're getting snow, and that's going to stick around through April and then come our spring rains. So not only are farmers in a bit of a time crunch already with trying to wrap up harvest, but planting this late into the year, of course, impacts what species they're able to successfully establish. And it certainly limits the amount of vegetative growth that they're able to get from the with that cover crop. And then farmers also have challenges accessing their fields in wet springs. We had one of those this past 2025 season with record-setting rainfall and cool temperatures in many parts of the state. Just to give you an example, here in Western New York, many of our fields were still too wet to plant, going as far late into the last week of May. And around that time, the USDA Planting Progress Report had documented that we only had 21% of our corn acres planted, where on a 5-year average, we would have had over 50% planted by that time. So that all adds additional time constraints on our farmers. And then lastly, there are questions around how to balance getting your cover crop planted and allowing it to grow long enough so that you're maximizing the benefits of that cover crop, including maximizing potentially available nitrogen in that biomass, while also timing termination appropriately so that you're not tying up nitrogen that you're going to need for your cash crop. Thank you. So to address these issues, our trials here in New York focus on an advanced no-till cover crop practice called planting green, where farmers are planting their cash crop in the spring into a living cover crop, as opposed to a common practice of terminating that cover crop with a herbicide and then waiting a week or two to then plant in the cash crop into that desiccated residue. And then the thought is that by delaying termination of this cover crop, we are extending the amount of time we can reap all of those benefits. We're keeping the soil covered, we're supporting soil biology, we're increasing biomass. And for farmers here dealing with wet springs, it can help to manage moisture in the spring while also then helping to conserve soil moisture later in the season from that biomass residue. And if you could just advance once more. Thank you. And so, as has been touched on already, roller crimping is often incorporated into planting green to effectively terminate that cover crop and lay the residue down in a way that can provide season-long weed suppression. And many of the challenges that Carol raised with successful roller crimping and termination certainly apply here as well. And next slide. Our farm partners for these trials are very representative of agriculture here in Western New York. Over the course of the project, their rotations included crops like grain corn, corn silage, soybeans, winter wheat, triticale. One of our operations was a certified organic dairy. For cover crops, they were experimenting. It ranged from experimenting with 10 and 5-way mixes to different variations of triticale, rye, and vetch mixes. And I want to point out that all of our farm partners had previously adopted cover crops into their rotations. Those were things that they were already doing. Many of them had already been exploring reduced tillage practices or no-till in some capacity. And I think that that's important to highlight when we get to the results later. But planting green was a new practice. And then for treatments, so 2 of our farm partners were comparing plots with no cover crops, plots that were terminated with a pre-plant herbicide, and then plots that were planted green. And then the other 2 farms were incorporating roller crimping into termination of the cover crop. All of our trials were replicated, And we followed all of the same sampling methodology that Aisha shared earlier, but we also came out to do additional cover crop biomass sampling, both at the time the cover crops were terminated with that herbicide, and then anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks later, right before planting green. And then those samples were sent off for dry matter and nitrogen analysis, which allowed us to estimate plant available nitrogen in that biomass. So to give you all a visual, here is an example of what these treatments look like at the time of planting. For the farms whose control was no cover crop, the figure on the left is what the field looked like at the time that when they planted. For our pre-plant termination plots, those farmers, like I said, they came in, they applied a pre-plant herbicide, and then came back in and planted into that desiccated residue. And then for the planting green plots, that cover crop was allowed to continue growing for those 1 to 3 weeks. It kind of varied from year to year. And they either planted directly into the standing cover crop, or they used a roller crimper to terminate and plant into that rolled residue. Next slide, thank you. So getting into the results, our New York Farms baseline soil health scores were all in the high region, in light green, in that bar in light green. So that indicates that their soils were functioning relatively well compared to farms with soils of similar texture. And this lines up when you consider the fact that these farmers had already been adopting soil health practices prior to these trials. And as a reminder, so to analyze the change over time, we subtracted those year 5 scores from year 1. And for the New York farms, we found that their overall soil health scores also increased across the board. And then when we look at the change in soil health indicators over time, we also found that soil organic matter and aggregate stability also increased across the board for all farms. Thanks, Ellen. And so I mentioned we collected a lot of cover crop biomass over the course of the trial. From this data, we found that planting green increased cover crop biomass up to 3 times more than if that cover crop had been terminated with the herbicide a few weeks prior. And that additional accumulation of biomass retained up to 2.5 times more potentially available nitrogen for that cash crop. And then also with the planting green treatments, looking at the change in soil health indicators, planting green also increased aggregate stability and overall scores compared to the control and pre-plant termination treatments. So altogether, I think a big takeaway is that we need more time to be able to see significant differences in these treatments. Next slide, please. For the economic results, I wanted to highlight some of our takeaways from the roller crimping treatments. Unfortunately, we found that these treatments had the lowest cash crop yields compared to the control and other treatments. But when it was successful, we had one farm document a 66% reduction in cover crop costs due to the fact that they didn't have to use herbicides to terminate their cover crop. And then in general, we found that it was difficult for our organic operation to successfully implement the planting green with the roller crimping, and there were complete cash crop failures in 2 of the 4 years of the trial. And then biggest takeaway, I think, again, we need more data. We need to continue researching roller crimping and planting green, particularly in organic systems, to try to find a way that farmers can do this successfully without negative impacts to their cash crop yields. Continuing, in general, we found that when we compared the no cover crop versus cover cropped treatments, there was minimal difference in cash crop yields. And then when comparing the traditional cover crop pre-plant termination burn down versus the planting green, we found that there is some exciting potential with planting green because it had minimum impact on yield for 2 of the farms that implemented those treatments. And then finally, there was no difference in the cover crop cost between these 2 termination strategies. Next slide. And just to kind of wrap it all up for New York, our overarching takeaways include in the first year, we noticed improvements in infiltration as well as planter performance. We also observed that planting green and roller crimping boosted cover crop biomass and potentially available nitrogen without causing substantial yield loss in the cash crop. And our organic systems really struggled with weed control with the planting green and successful crop establishment. But overall, I think the biggest benefit that came out was that farms were able to remain profitable while adopting soil health management systems. And then finally, some of the biggest challenges and I think areas for continued research. As many of us have touched on already, having those short windows of time in the fall really limit farmers' varietal selection when it comes to planting cover crops after corn. In the organic corn and soybean systems, weed management is really something we need to dial into. And then on our conventional farm that implemented roller crimping, they observed a delay in their cash crop planting, which in turn led to delayed harvest, which in turn led to an inability to plant a fall cover crop. So lots of things to dial in, but promising data. With that, I'm going to pass it to Ellen.
Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks to all the state leads. This is awesome, learning so much. And I don't know if I introduced myself at the beginning. So I'm Ellen Yateman. I'm the social science analyst and ag economist for this project. And today I'm just going to give a high-level overview of some of our social science results. So I'm just going to focus on the social science farmer survey results. And myself and Dr. Gabrielle Roche McNally, who is also a PI on this project, led a variety of methods for collecting data. But today we're going to look at the results of the social indicator surveys of the participating farmers that they completed in year 1, year 3, and year 5. And I'll integrate some quotes from the farmer focus group that we conducted last fall. And then I'll give a brief overview of the field days that were conducted between year 2 and year 4. So in terms of experience, in our year 1 survey, we asked them what their experience was with not only cover crops, but also other conservation practices. So as you can see on the left here, this question on top of the graph, we asked what conservation practices were you doing before this trial? Select all that apply. And I'm only showing a portion of the results. We actually gave them 12 conservation practices to choose from. And this graph is showing the top 4 practices that they're doing either on some acres or crops, as indicated in the light green bars, or on all acres or crops, as indicated in the dark green bars. And cover crops and reduced tillage were the practices that the majority of these farmers had already done, at least on some acres or crops. Particularly 12 farmers did have cover crop experience, with 2 farmers that cover cropped already on all acres or crops. We just had 1 farmer with no cover crop experience. And the majority of our farmers have implemented at least 5 conservation practices. And this, as Caitlin just mentioned, it explains a lot of why a lot of our baseline soil results were high and why our economic results were pretty minor or not substantial differences. And that explains there's just a lot of variation in these farm trial designs because it's looking at subtle differences in cover crop management for many of our trials. But despite these farmers being early adopters, there was desire to participate and to continue to learn more. So what did motivate these farmers to adopt these new cover crop practices? This table on the left is showing the top 3 motivations to try new cover crop practices and from the year 1 survey versus the year 5 survey. They had 14 motivations to select from, but the top 3 by year 5 was improving crop yields, reducing erosion, or increasing resilience to drought. In year 1, they had the top 3 was sequester carbon in my soils was a top motivation, but it was replaced by reducing erosion by year 5. And what's interesting, before I go to the largest increases, the improving crop yields, it did stay a top motivation, but that motivation decreased by 13% between year 1 and year 5. In terms of like the largest change in motivation between year 1 and year 5, there was a 20% increase in those motivated to reduce erosion. There was also, not shown in this table, but there was a 20% increase in motivation to improve biodiversity. And then there was this decrease by 20% in motivation to sequester carbon. And what's interesting here is the distribution of responses increased over time. And this is potentially due to participants learning of additional benefits. Maybe they were motivated not only to improve crop yields, but they were learning, oh, also I could reduce erosion or increase resilience to drought. So it's an interesting result. We also wanted to know, what are their concerns as early adopters? Well, in year 1 survey, we asked just that. And we asked, what are your concerns about adopting these new practices on your farm? And they had 14 concerns to select from. But their top 4 concerns were, despite being the most fairly experienced cover crop users, they had cash crop yield drag concerns, additional cost concerns, selecting the right cover crop species, adjusting fertilizer appropriately. And we've heard a lot of these things from our team, state lead teammates already, and that was validated here by our survey results. And also, as the state leads relayed, these concerns did come to fruition in some ways, yet when we heard directly from the farmers, they indicated how some of their concerns were actually addressed. And so I have some quotes to share with you. One farmer said they grew more of a crop than they expected with less inputs. Another said, I never, I guess, had the courage to give the income up to take that chance to try to learn. So it's very impactful to me and then get to see, like I say, some of the differences in soil quality. Another said, we've been experimenting with cover crops for many years, and a lot of it has been sort of just sticking our thumb in the wind, trying to say whether or not there was a true benefit. And having AFT do all that stuff for us, gather the data that is, to me was a big benefit. And this last quote gets at these number 3 and 4 concerns directly. One farmer said that having a better idea what a specific cover crop mix provides as far as fertility in the next 2 to 3 years, that, has really helped adjust our fertilizer rates. Just being more confident about counting what cover crops are providing and being confident that cutting back the fertilizer by X amount is okay because it's already there. I'm also going to briefly touch on how we were interested in how this trial could impact social networks. In year 3 and year 5 survey, we asked, how has your engagement with networks of other farmers or service providers changed since participating in this project? And we saw a 24% increase in engagement with other participating farmers between year 3 and year 5. But we saw no network growth outside of the trial. So perhaps moving in our next trial, we really want to give the farmers the tools to go out beyond the trial and grow their network with other farmers that are perhaps trying their treatments of interest or just talking about their experience. And in general, farmers shared in our focus group how much they valued the opportunity for knowledge exchange. And one way we catered to or curated this ability to exchange their learnings is by hosting field days. There was 9 field days hosted between year 2 and year 4. And in aggregate, about 400 attendees came to these events. And we did conduct this exit survey at every field day. And I'm not going to go over those results today. We will provide those results in a final report on our website, but Just wanted to share some quotes from our participating farmers about how useful these field days were. One farmer said, "Was surprised to see the folks that showed up, some of my neighbors that were interested, that never used cover crops. It was a good showing of ag professionals and resource people that came, and that was great to get so many of those folks." Another farmer said, "And then the second part I really enjoyed about this project was not only just sharing the information with me, but having the field days. We had two separate days on our own site, and they were really well attended. And you know, if AFT and the farms are going to do the work, it's nice to share." So that was some heartwarming quotes there. And finally, we asked in all three surveys this question: how likely are you to continue implementing the conservation practices you're experimenting with as part of this project? Well, as you see in this table on the right, we have the answer choices, which was a likelihood Likert scale from very likely to very unlikely. And in year one, we had 33% say very likely. And by year 5, we had 60% said very likely to continue implementing these practices. So a 27% increase and very likely. When you look at the combination of likely and very likely, it was in year one, we already had 80% saying that they were likely to very likely continue to implement these treatments that they're trying. And we know because a lot of these were already doing aspects of the trial already, as we have discussed, but it increased 100% were either likely or very likely by year 5. So that's still a win. And one farmer went so far as adding, "I plan to implement the trial practices across the whole operation." And this was our one farmer who had no experience with cover crops. So that was really exciting. So here's my final slide, kind of the key social data takeaways. So overall, these fairly experienced farmers, still had room to grow, and they increased their willingness to persist with new practices by 20%. I'm going to skip down to challenges so we can end on the positive. So in terms of challenges, like our state leads have mentioned, there were lots of mentions in the survey and focus group of the weather impediments, the timing of cover crop planting, as well as termination, and a lot of feedback from our participating farmers on how they wish they had more time. They would love for this to be a longer trial. They'd love to keep collecting the data and do these treatments. In terms of benefit, like I mentioned, they said in multiple places that networking with the other participating farmers was hugely beneficial. Of the kind of technical aspects of the project, they really enjoyed the soil sampling and analysis presented every year through their farmer reports. And it was really interesting to see how many observed reduced soil erosion, which was very exciting. And here's just a nice quote to end on from one of our participating farmers: "I've enjoyed working with the project and feel as though it is some of the most useful information we gather on our farm." And with that, Bianca's going to wrap us up with the kind of even higher level lessons learned to share with everyone here.
I'm so glad to be here. So glad that all of you are still around who are still around. So thanks for sticking with us, and we will get to questions after this. I'm going to wrap us up. High-level successes, right? We actually achieved getting through a 5-year project with all of the challenges you've been hearing about, interdisciplinary assessments across 15 farms, across more than 40 AFT staff that were involved, 6 partners. We learned a lot. And I would say we really inspired adoption, as you just heard from all of our regional leads and from Ellen's social summary. It is amazing when you really work with farmers, you get the farmers engaged, they get each other engaged, they inspire each other to think about this and to be curious. So that was really exciting. We also learned a lot. We certainly made some mistakes. We had some design flaws that became much more clear later. And we were actually able to apply those lessons of our own shortcomings in this trial to our National Biochar Trials Network that is now active and still will be active at least through fiscal year 28. But we continue to build on this kind of work. So I want to finish off with some high-level lessons learned. First, some recommendations from us as a large team to anybody out there who's trying to implement projects like this. what we learned indicates that some key things really need to be built into these projects. One of them, as you've seen, is flexibility, really allowing for co-production with the farmer, making sure that as you bring in farmers, you really get to know them, you get to know their operation, you get to know what they're curious about, so that they can work with us for 5 years. We learn from them, they learn from us, we all learn together. They get to teach other farmers, and flexibility for all those challenges, right? What do you do when the weather does what it does, when the farm gets sold, when the crop fails? Building in flexibility into your project so that it doesn't really impair your project's overall progress, and so that you can harvest the lessons learned, is really critical. Timing, really planning in to make sure you have time for farmer recruitment. We'll talk about that in a moment more. And having tiers of trials, right? Some farmers have a lot of things to contend with and want to participate in a trial, but they don't want it to be a full-on replicated research trial, because that's sometimes really hard to do. And so allowing for the replication level to be anywhere from a single strip through a field to fully replicated is an important component when you're really trying to bring in other farmers. And having some tiers for adoption level, right? Working with those farmers that are first-time adopters, all the way to farmers who are real innovators, real communicators, who bring in the network, who have something to share, working with them as well, building in the ability to work across all of those types of farmers is a key for allowing these trials to create impact. Co-design, right? Really plan for that process, making sure that we bring in those farmers and build these tiers, build what works for them throughout a project is just really key to make sure to have time for that. And finally, outcomes, right? We really need to have realistic expectations. In 3 to 5 years, you're generally not going to see soil differences from minor management changes. You might just start to see some of the differences in a replicated trial with really extreme management differences. But you heard from some of our folks about the economic results, right? We do start to see some of those, especially when we're really changing the strategy of an operation for what they sell, what they value, and how. Making sure to really align the methods to what your outcomes are expected to be and what's realistic is important. Next slide. So wrapping that part up, right, you really have to know your goals. If your goals are to impact adoption, then one of the things we really saw very much in this project, and that we see across a bunch of AFT projects, is that peer networks are a real key for farmers to feel supported in their community and to really enable them to adopt these practices. Having an ability to establish more easier trials on farms can help bring in some kind of curious adopters that are hesitant, and making sure that there's a training component and really good technical assistance that allows for farmers to adopt, and having adoption incentives. Like, we paid our farmers incentive stipends, and we also made available a net return guarantee for when they had severe yield losses so that they would not bear that risk. So that's for if you want to have adoption impact. If you want to have a scientific project where you see big soil health changes, that means you need to have large management differences and really solid replication, and you have to minimize other variables. That can be really hard to achieve. So that's something to really think through how you can do that in a 5-year project, or if you can leverage other work so you can make that longer term. That's a real key to see those differences. Finally, if you want to increase profits, you really need to include experts who understand that space. Farmer experts who have that experience, economists who really know how to analyze those kinds of data, and generally you need more time, especially if you're looking for increased profits from the soil health change itself. So I want to point you to our soil health case studies where we looked at soil health economics on farms that had adopted a long time ago and had much more time to actually see those differences. I think that's a really great resource. That is not something we were able to do in this project, but therefore comes the next slide. Some lessons learned for the NRCS CIG team. First of all, as the program currently stands, I just want to say, keep up the vision, right? We built this program to have in mind a key need that is for national soil health, economic, and social data sets to be available, to be standardized in a way where they can be analyzed at the national level so that we can really understand the interconnections between soil health, their influences on the economics, and the social components that really drive adoption. So making sure to keep that up. A lot of progress has happened. There's still some progress left to be done. Really understanding the paths to adoption that producers take and what it is, how it is that we can best support them, and understanding rates of change, right? And then the awardees who get these wonderful funds. Thank you very much to NRCS. This has been amazing. What the awardees, I think, need are expanded minimum data set methods guidance so that it can all be rolled up into a national data set. And I think co-learning mechanisms. I think there are opportunities across these projects that are happening across the country for folks to learn with each other. We had a little bit of an opportunity to do that at conferences. I think there's more opportunity for project leads and staff to learn from each other. And finally, having that usable system for data sharing, both with USDA and beyond, for projects to share data with each other, with farmer permission. I think those are key needs that there's a lot of opportunity still to build that up. And then finally, I want to wrap up with sort of the dreaming. Soil health changes slowly over time. What else could the CIG program consider? I think there's opportunity for networking across awardees during the recruitment year because there are many connections across the partner space, and there's potential for awardees to send each other farmers who might be interested in each other's projects. I think that there could be a path for CIG project continuations for promising projects. So when a project has delivered, and gosh, if we just monitored these farms for another 5 years and we kept building these relationships, how can we further build up adoption? I think there's opportunity there. And a path for CIG project partner mentorships, right? For the projects that have delivered, for those who have learned a lot, to be able to share those lessons with other projects who may just be getting started, all the way from how to lead a project like this programmatically, but also how to administratively do that. I think there's a lot to learn there, and a lot of projects could become more efficient by learning from each other. And I know this is not possible right now, but if there were 10 years of funding in these kinds of projects, how do we build that into what is possible? So those are some of the recommendations that we have, and we would love to learn from all of you. So I'm going to get us into the last bit of Q&A, have some room for discussion. We have a lot of great questions. If you go to the next slide, I would love to engage everybody. If you have implemented a trial project like this before, please raise your hand. We just kind of love to gauge who all has worked like this before. If you would like to share in the chat any reflections on our experience, any lessons from your experience, any recommendations you would have for other people doing these projects, or any recommendations for NRCS, we would love to pool those here together and we'll share them. With that, I'm going to go to the amazing list of questions and we'll get through some of those. One question, I'll start with some economic and soils questions, and then we'll go into the regional questions. Economic questions, Dara was wondering, where were the input costs pulled from in the economics portion? Were they in an example budget? So Robert, if you can come off mute and share where input costs were pulled from, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So perfect economist answer here. It depends. So it depends on which one it was. So if it was a input that was more local, for example, the cover crop seed costs, we got that directly from the producer. Some of the bigger stuff like your fertilizer inputs for national averages, things like that. And then when it came down to herbicide and chemicals, that was more the producer level too. One thing we did make sure to do is, especially on the organic side, is if we did have a national average, to run that by the producer to make sure that it was at least somewhat on par with what they were using.
Thank you, Robert. All right, another question. Thomas Bjorkman was wondering, long-term 30 to 50-year trials have shown that it takes about 5 years to see first change in organic matter-related parameters. This is kind of what we've been discussing here, right? Then after that, the change is linear. How can that phenomenon be accounted for in this kind of project? And I would say my answer is, in this kind of project, in a 3 to 5 year project, the only way we would account for something like that would be if we had farmers who were long-term adopters, but who were, say, renting a neighbor's field that had been conventional, and we looked at that kind of this has been conventional, and here's a field that's been in production for 20 to 30 years. Now let's compare soils, economics, and social aspects. That might be one option. There might be other ideas for how a project like this could account for that, but we know soil health takes a while to change. So those are my ideas. I would love other people to share their ideas in the chat. But for time's sake, I'm going to move on. We've got a couple of questions for California for Paul. Diana was wondering, curious to know where control included resident vegetation, which has been shown to increase nitrogen and carbon inputs depending on the species present. Not sure I actually understand that question.
I'll work through it.
Yeah, do.
Great question,
see it too.
Diana. I first want to say 2 of our trials farmers did maintain resident vegetation. Those are the perennial crops, wine grapes and almonds. The vegetable farmer throughout the winter either sprayed or tilled his control. So let's if we narrow down to the perennial crops, which is very common to maintain resident vegetation. In fact, we encourage that just to have, the biomass if they're not going to cover crop. But, and I'm going to just throw a few things out here and tell me if I'm not addressing your question. It's pretty well known, but I want to state the advantage of cover crops over resident vegetation. A number of the species typically in a cover crop mix, clovers, peas, vetch, fixed nitrogen. The cover crop mixes have different growth rates, different emergence times, and so that provides more resilience. They tend to be deep rooted, more resilient to either high rainfall or drought. Versus resident vegetation, in many cases, it's a fewer species mix. And I know in many fields in California, resident vegetation might include burr clover, which possibly fixes a very small amount of nitrogen, but some of the rye type grasses, malva, that's typical in resident vegetation, do not fix. So better than bare soil, but certainly the soil nutrition and soil biology, biomass, those advantages come from cover crops. Let's see, carbon inputs. So tell me, Diana, am I hitting your question?
And maybe we can take that to the chat because
Okay.
we have, let's see, I want to allow people to go at 3, but I know that I can stay on some longer and maybe some other folks can if we want to carry over the Q&A for a while.
Absolutely. And we can meet offline and, and really dig into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of these questions really could use some digging into. Let's see, a New York question. Felon Stover asking of Caitlin, was there any issue with planting green and seed viability with change of conditions?
Any issue with planting green and seed viability? Not that I'm aware of. That would be a great question for Aaron Risto if he was still on our team. I can't speak to that directly, unfortunately.
And then similar follow-up questions, Caitlin. I wonder if you know anything about planting green improving weed suppression in these trials, and if there were any challenges with cash crop emergence. And that might also be a question for folks other than New York. I know in Kentucky there were some trials with this, and in New England, so welcome the rest of the team to chime in on planting green. So weed suppression, cash crop emergence, arthropod dynamics.
Yeah, I can speak to New York. The planting green trials, I wish I had pictures to share with you. On some of our farms, that cover crop residue was present through August and September into preparing for corn harvest. It was really quite impressive. Certainly I think there's season-long weed suppression that's happening in those planting green treatments. I saw Diana's question around how planting green helps to facilitate seedling establishment. I think there's a lot that plays in. Moisture management is a big one. With that biomass, you're increasing infiltration and reducing surface and possibly subsurface compaction, depending on what species you've got planted in that mix, reducing surface crusting. I mean, all of these things are going to help seedlings to establish early on. You're reducing runoff and ponding of water that could lead to washouts in the field and needs to replant. And then there's reduction in competition from weeds, having that cover crop residue present throughout the season. And then to speak to the arthropods, that is right down my line of interest. I would love to know more about that. Anecdotally, I can share that when I was out in those fields, I saw a lot of ground-dwelling beetles. I saw a lot of lady beetles. And I mean, that cover crop biomass is great habitat for all of your soil-dwelling arthropods. So it's going to positively help with pest or cutworm damage or other pests that our young seedlings are susceptible to. So I mean, lots of things happening in the planting green system that help with seedling emergence and establishment. But I'll let others chime in.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Bianca, quickly, in Kentucky, we just had one farmer planted green. There was definitely reduced weed pressure, and we actually saw it kind of continue into the next year, I guess you would say, where you could see differences in kind of weed species and weed pressure between the cover crop, non-cover crop fields. So you get, I think, multiple years benefit. I did see a question about slugs. None of our farmers had any issues with slugs as a result of, utilizing cover crops. So that wasn't an issue for any of our farmers.
And I'll just note for that and the general management recommendations, we will actually be publishing an advanced soil health training series toolkit. We are in the process of recording those right now. It will feature both AFT staff and some of our partner staff, actually some folks that were at USDA previously, talking about exactly these kinds of issues and providing some more detailed management guidance on how to implement planting green, how to roller crimp, what kinds of considerations need to be taken into consideration so that can be done successfully. Okay, we are definitely a bit past time, so I want to just take a moment and thank everybody who does need to go somewhere else. And then we can take maybe another 10 minutes and answer a couple other questions for those folks that do want to stay on. But thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your engagement, and we would be very excited to get more questions from you. And if you have thoughts on gaps we need to address or certain aspects of this that you really want to hear more about, we will get that information to you and get more out as we keep going with this kind of work. All right, so a couple other questions that came through. Salvian asked, this is to Caro. I was impressed with the New England trials results for green chopping of cover crops. Are there still restrictions around the amount of a cover crop that can be grazed or chopped while still being considered a cover crop for reimbursement or incentive purposes?
Yeah, so I wasn't actually sure about this one, so I quickly messaged some of my colleagues who work more closely with NRCS planning work. And assuming that you're talking about NRCS programs, our understanding is, and the advice I got from them was that it will really vary by the program that you're applying to, the scenario, the region, and in some cases, even the resource concern behind the plan practices. So it's really, so often with NRCS, the best answer is to ask your planner. But I wonder if Bianca, with your experience, or if anyone else wants to add to that.
I think the it depends answer is unfortunately, again, applicable. There are so many nuances to which program and which resource concern and who you're working with and what that particular state's priorities are. So in terms of those programs, there could be impacts. I do want to note that if it is making a farmer that much more profit, it may just be worth it by itself. And that's one of the things that we were discovering both sort of through our work at AFT and previously while I was at NRCS. When farmers really get the technical assistance on how to put a cover crop in place and they start to learn what the economic benefits are, they eventually don't need the kind of public grant support. It's that transition phase that's the really hard part. And so to anybody who's working in that space, really helping farmers get going so that then it's economically viable on their own without needing additional support, and so that they can share that around. That's really one of the places that we found success in terms of scaling that up. Let's see, other questions, some general regional questions. We talked about slugs a little bit. Sometimes you can do things in terms of getting the predators of slugs a home. I think that there's some folks we can tap into to make sure that's part of our advanced soil health series. Thomas Bjorkman, thanks for joining us. You had a bunch of really good questions. Regarding zone till, skips and uneven germination came up as an issue. That's usually because the soil didn't flow well enough. With just one zone builder pass and the furrow opener to prepare the seedbed, the cover crops have to be fairly friable. The cover crop roots have to be fairly friable, and the soil should have some extra aggregates of the right size. That will have the fast start and no gaps that are needed to meet the management goals. So great comment from Thomas. Thank you for sharing that. Is no gaps a criterion a cover crop stand must meet by 2 weeks after planting? Any thoughts on that question?
I'm not sure what the question about no gaps, but I did want to thank you, Thomas, for this question, for elaborating on it. I wanted to clarify that the issue of the skips that I talked about was mainly in the no-till parcel, and that the zone tillage really removed that obstacle. So in terms of how cover crop roots and residue would impact the smoothness of the furrow and planting process, my instinct is that there are really a lot of factors that influence this. So things like equipment specifics, not just which implement you're using, but the type and condition of the coulters on it, right? So like newer coulters are going to work better. Also soil texture, moisture, rocks, compaction, and the maturity of the cover crop, right? So I think what I would say, I don't think I have enough experience on this to speak from, on the ground experience, but I think my instinct is that these factors would all play a bigger role than which specific cover crop species you're using in any given year. But I'm really curious if others want to weigh in on this.
I'd like to weigh in a little bit. So what Caitlin said is very much right. I think what's happened, so for example, one of our farmers in Kentucky has a concern about, planting in green into a full cover crop, where they're now modifying how they put in cover crops to have what he calls precision cover cropping, where he has cover crops in strips, and then he can do kind of a zone tillage in between the strips, or even a no-till in between the strips, so he's not having to battle with that growing cover crop where you might have chunks because you have dense root growth in a full cover crop area. You might have chunks or maybe not be able to make that good seed to soil contact in the furrow. So that's a way he's modifying his system to kind of deal with challenges that he feels like he has. So I do think there's different approaches to, is it a cover crop mix? Is it how you plant it? Having kind of these precision strips. There's different ways to address that issue.
That's really helpful, Brian.
And that again points to the great value of peer networks, both for the technical service providers like us and our partners, and for the farmers who are working with us and farmers who are advising other farmers. So really building those relationships, learning from each other is such a big key. Well, I want to close this out. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for your input. We would love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to reach out. Also, you can join our mailing list so that you can hear about future webinars and other resources that become available. Thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.